各位觀眾大家好，歡迎收睇26分鐘見證實錄。華裔喺加國嘅足跡有200年，一代又一代嘅華裔移民喺加國付出同埋奮鬥，對於卑詩省嘅發展呢，亦都有住莫大嘅貢獻。咁要將當中嘅故事同埋精神傳承落去，歷史嘅記錄同埋保存就變得尤其重要。卑詩省府早前就宣布撥款2750萬元，支持卑詩省華裔博物館協會去持續發展同運作。咁包括購買溫哥華華埠歷史最悠久建築物永生號大樓，作為華裔博物館嘅永久館址。永生號大樓由加拿大華裔先驅，被譽為係溫哥華華埠非官方市長嘅葉生，始建於1889年。咁究竟呢一座建築物承載住乜嘢歷史故事？呢100多年間經歷咗啲乜嘢嘅變遷？咁嚟到5月嘅亞裔傳統月尾聲，我哋會同大家一齊走入呢一座甚具歷史價值嘅建築物。
And this is an exciting day for all British Columbians, especially those from the Chinese Canadian community. This acquisition of the landmark Wing Sang building in the heart of Vancouver's Chinatown is absolutely cause for celebration.
Bob doesn't have to own it, the family doesn't have to own it, but we did something for the community. So we're all really proud of it.
This has been a dream of the communities for a very, very long time.
咁我哋好高興呢一樣嘢咧，就能夠去慶祝同埋紀念我哋先僑嚟到加拿大呢100幾年嘅歷史嘅，為卑詩省嘅經濟文化各方面嘅貢獻。
We are the custodian of that, moving forward, the custodian of this history, preserving this heritage, and then sharing this history and heritage and stories, with, of course, reflecting the Chinese Canadian community, but really for everyone.
I felt when I heard the new Chinese Canadian Museum would be at Wing Sang that they could not have chosen a more perfect location.
呢一座位於溫哥華華埠 East Panda 片打東街51號嘅維多利亞風格建築，擁有過百年歷史，喺1889年建成。當年由華裔商人葉生所擁有，係佢一家20多口居住嘅地方。
Yip Sang is my great grandfather on my father's side.
Linda Yip 葉秀影係眾多葉生後人當中其中一位家族成員。
This is Yip Q Shek. He was the 9th son of Yip Sang, and he was my grandfather. And he is standing in front of the front door of Wing Sang at 51 East Pender. My father was literally born on the top floor because he was the 4th wife, and the 4th wife's family was the top floor. Yeah, it was 6 stories, and then the top 3 floors were wife 2, 3, and 4's family. And since I come from the 4th wife, we were at the very top floor. Lots of stairs.
葉秀影本身亦係一名系譜學家，專門研究以及記錄家族歷史、成員以及親屬淵源。
I have so much passion for genealogy because it is about the story. One of my huge passions is uncovering the truth behind those stories and fleshing them out into real living human beings so we can appreciate all that they went through to make us Canadians.
當然，葉秀影對自己不平凡嘅家族歷史背景以及曾祖父葉生有深入嘅研究。
In some ways, I've always known about Yip Sang as this man. He was important in the family, but my research shows that he was of far more importance than I had ever guessed. And one of the key stories that comes up for me where I first thought, this is a man of real importance, was after the 1907 Chinatown riots. And so you have to imagine there had been a mob coming through Chinatown, and they had smashed all of the windows and terrified Chinese and the Japanese who had fought back. And after that, the immigration commissioner had been sent to BC to interview the residents and the businessmen. And he liked asking Yip Sang questions about the riots, and it turned into kind of inquiry, not into restitution, which was what the idea was, but rather about immigration. And it was those questions and that fencing between Yip Sang and the immigration commissioner, because the immigration commissioner was William Lyon Mackenzie King, who later became the Prime Minister of Canada during World War II.
葉生原名葉春田，喺1881年遷移到加拿大卑斯省，曾經做過賣煤炭小販，後來受僱於加拿大太平洋鐵路物料公司，負責入數、記錄工時以及出納等工作。佢喺1888年喺溫哥華創立永生號，經營出入口生意，係華埠最大嘅進出口貿易公司之一。葉生當時亦努力幫助其他中國移民克服社會、經濟及政治上遇到嘅各種困難，咁所以有溫哥華華埠非官方市長嘅稱號。
當然一個好大嘅望族啦，係咪？即係葉生係一個成功嘅商人，亦都係呢個華僑社會嘅棟梁，可以講得喺當時嗰個關係。咁佢亦都協助建立呢個中華會館。中華會館喺當時咧就幾乎等於一個領事館咁上下㗎啦。
Why would Chinese businessmen develop an association like this? And it's because there was a lack of infrastructure for Chinese Canadians. And so when you have a lack of social welfare, immigrants coming to the country, they don't speak the language, they don't have a place to live, they don't have jobs, they just need to get over the doorstep. And the CBA did that and more. For example, it also argued for burials, birth, life, and death. It encompassed every part of life in this community.
葉生喺1889年建造永生號大樓，並且先後喺1901年同1912年擴建變成6層高嘅建築。咁大樓除咗係永生公司做生意嘅地方之外，亦都係葉生佢4名太太同埋23名子女嘅居所。
Wing Sang, it's probably important to explain that it was a complex. It was a warehouse, a China-style compound, a home, a business, also the seat of a number of Chinese associations. And so it was a real nexus of different interactions and connections and people.
葉秀影解釋，永生號大樓當年另一重要嘅功能就係作為聯繫華裔移民嘅中心點以及郵遞中心。
Wing Sang wrote to the government and said, look, we have so many Chinese working in the area and they live from mail, right? Just remittance letters and news from home. And it's really hard for them to get off work and then like shoot out to the post office before it closes. So can we just have a post office in Chinatown? And Canada Post was like, no.
因此，永生號大樓當年就成為大批華裔工人同家鄉通訊往來嘅渠道。
Based on work such as Yip and his family and his legacy. So it's not just, a building, but an enduring mode of thought where a community comes together and does what's right.
葉秀影從研究家族歷史中認識到，曾祖父葉生好重視子女嘅教育，咁所以永生號大樓亦都誕生出好多對社區有貢獻嘅人。
When I think about Yip and his legacy, I think about family, and I think about the connectivity, and what do Chinese people want? They want to have children to continue the legacy. And you need to have someone like Yip Sang to be able to provide the money, because it is not cheap, to send people to school, to have the first Chinese-Canadian lawyer, to have the first Chinese-Canadian doctor, to house Nellie Yip Gong, who was the midwife and lived at Wing Sang, and soccer stars, people to uplift the community. Queenie Yip was a son of Yip. And so you have all of these people coming together to build and continue the Yip's legacy.
葉生1927年去世，享年82歲。葉秀影表示，葉氏後人其實亦希望保留永生號大樓嘅業權，但係就面對一定嘅困難。
The family is at once incredibly proud and has this big burden. Year over year, just trying to make the taxes, just trying to pay the bills, and keep the roof from falling in. And they lasted another 60 years, actually, from that enormous tax bill. And I feel like they hung on, and more power to them for hanging on. And also, I mean, the building is a physical representation of hope. Yip Sang's hope for the future, his declaration of an investment in Canada, because he could have built other places. And the Yips, I think, wanted to hold on to that as long as they could. And then they were afraid when they sold it, what would happen to it? Would the developer take it down, or would it, well, now we know what happened.
This is the lane way right there.
結果到咗2004年，著名溫哥華地產業人士 Bob Rennie 購入永生號大樓。佢不但止冇將日久失修嘅大樓拆卸，相反，佢打算將永生號大樓重新修葺。咁喺2005年嘅時候，我哋就曾經採訪過佢。
Tenement building at the back that has been condemned, and we're about to see 6 levels of over 40 rooms. And it's just been forgotten. Up until 6 months ago, it was only inhabited by birds. And so we're just going through the process of cleaning it up, and then to start to dismantle the inside of it.
Bob Rennie 接手之後，要將大樓前面改建為自己公司嘅辦公室，而後面嘅6層高大樓就變成一個私人藝術館。咁當中涉及大量嘅工作，包括重修結構同埋加建防震設備。Bob Rennie 當時亦都將自己嘅計劃同構思向一啲華裔社區人士分享。
This will be the entrance to an art gallery. This will be used for running marketing systems.
一班社區人士當時都好關心永生號大樓會變成點樣。
What is the timeline for the project? How many people you expect to work in the building, and also too, eventually, are you going to open up your private gallery maybe on Saturdays?
Can you mention one unique attribute in your own words and as to how this project is going to benefit the Chinatown community?
到咗2008年，Bob Rennie 邀請咗超過300名葉生家族成員進行一次聚會，參觀就快修葺完成嘅永生號大樓。
Today's reunion is really intended to celebrate the refurbishing and reconstruction of the Yip Sang building.
Linda 葉秀影當年亦都有出席該次聚會。
About 375 Yips gathered, converged upon Vancouver's Chinatown, and we had what my husband calls more like a conference, not really like a family reunion. And the showpiece of this weekend was going to be the brand new renovated Wing Sang building. Except the thing about monuments and heritage buildings is that they don't get renovated on a schedule. There's always something going wrong, and so Bob, the renovations were behind schedule, and so we almost didn't get to see it. But Bob got really creative. He bought hard hats for every one of us, and he got his staff to take us through one group at a time, and it was amazing because we walked through those walls that were halfway through renovation, that were just stripped to the studs, and we had our aunties and uncles going through and saying, you know, this is where my mother used to cook our dinner. And this is where, you know, we used to sleep. And to see them like just point to the studs and then paint that empty space with memory was a beautiful thing to see. I'm still so glad.
究竟永生號大樓經過翻新之後變成點樣嘅模樣？又係點解會成為華裔博物館嘅永久館址呢？下一節翻嚟再睇。 翻嚟節目時間，華裔博物館係喺加拿大首間同類博物館，肩負起將華裔歷史以及文化遺產傳承落去嘅重任。而一直出錢出力去保存永生號大樓歷史特色嘅 Bob Rennie， 又係乜嘢原因願意割愛去成就將呢一座溫哥華華埠歷史最悠久嘅建築物成為華裔博物館嘅所在地呢？今時今日走入重新修葺過嘅永生號大樓，即時可以睇到大樓內充滿現代感同埋藝術元素。
And we took out 4 floors to create a museum space. So this is why we were the right custodian, is we created a proper functioning museum. So when the Chinese Canadian Museum comes in, they already have the space that they coveted.
不過就仍然保留住好多歷史結構同痕跡。
But come on down. The stripes on the stairs are art by a Scottish artist named Jim Lambie, but this will come off. We needed function, but we wanted to make sure that you always saw pieces of the heritage. And here, you saw the photos.
04年購入大樓嘅 Bob Rennie 話，修葺嘅時候，佢哋盡量保持建築物嘅歷史特色。
So this is the 3-story building, the 6-story building. Just myself, whenever we interfere with history, we should always show it. So this was 1912, but in 2006-07, I interfered with it. So 100 years from now, when you go through, you can see that this was interfered with. If we made it too pretty, you would never know what was historical and what was interfered with. And this secret passageway, when we restored the building, the foundation wasn't proper at the front, and there was still doors because you used to be able to go under the street. The street had filled it in, but the doors were still there.
Bob Rennie 話：為咗保存歷史結構，修葺工程結果超時又超支，用咗5年嘅時間，耗資2200萬先至得以完成。
The city told me that this is too close to here. And so we were going to cut 3 inches off, and then it would have been so costly and ruin the history. So we cut the stairs by 3 inches. But working with code and heritage is very expensive.
除咗結構，內部亦都保存咗好多歷史原貌。Bob Rennie 話：好似呢一個房間，以往其實係一間課室。
The writing on the wall is, this is the oldest schoolroom in the city of Vancouver, is you would come here to learn English in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s and westernize. But then as you were overly westernizing and kids were just speaking English at school, this was a language school, and you would come here on weekends through the 60s, 70s, and 80s and learn Cantonese so that you didn't disrespect or lose your heritage with your grandparents.
Bob Rennie 接手永生號大樓之後，的確花咗唔少心血喺呢一座建築物，所以最初佢冇諗過要出售大樓。
And the conversation just sort of evolved. Would we consider, and mine was never. You know, this is my family legacy. A foundation to the art collection is on social justice. And this building, when you look at the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923, that there was only 50 Chinese citizens were allowed to immigrate to Canada between 1923 and 1947, the secret passageway, etc. It fit what I do with the collection, and this was always supposed to be for my children. And then as you put your ego aside and start to think about what is right for Chinatown, I don't think Bob Rennie should be the owner of the oldest structure in Vancouver's Chinatown and have the Chinese Canadian Museum figuring out how to retrofit some 15 or 40 or 60-year-old building. So we started to talk a little more logically.
最終佢都係願意成就將華裔博物館設立喺永生號大樓嘅呢一個安排。
I am the best custodian to restore the building, but am I the right custodian to own it when the Chinese Canadian Museum is looking for a space? So I started to talk with my family, and they were really worried about me and how will I live without it. And we just started to talk as what's the right thing to do.
不過佢對永生號大樓仍然抱有好深嘅感情。當睇翻17年前嘅片段，亦感觸良多。
So this is when Fairchild interviewed me.
So there's 6 levels of this.
I still have the railing to the stairway. I relate it very much to all of your viewers or any of us here when your children decide to go off to university. Very mixed feelings because you want them at home and you want them. We all want yesterday back all the time. But what we went through with the family is I have 6 grandchildren. Can my grandchildren walk by here and say, they call me Bob, Bob did something for the community. And we also came to the conclusion that if we're going to let the building go, then we have to help make sure it's sustainable. And that's why we made a donation.
為咗確保博物館持續嘅發展，同時亦都希望維係住同大樓嘅關係 ，Bob Rennie 更決定透過自己家庭嘅基金，向博物館捐出780萬元。
I will always stay a friend of the museum because even though my name's not on it, I feel my name's on it. I want no misunderstanding that we don't believe in Chinatown. I felt it was very important that as we handed it over to the Chinese Canadian Museum, that we endorsed it. To simply just turn it over to them may look like my voice here, my voice in the rest of the world is for art. My voice here is for real estate. And I didn't want anyone to misconstrue that I didn't believe in Chinatown. Yeah, so in 2005, we walked out from there. Yeah, there was a door here that you could walk over.
Bob Rennie 話：基於兒時嘅背景，自己同華埠有深厚嘅淵源同感情。但係佢表示，溫哥華華埠目前的確面對一定嘅問題。佢希望今次將永生號大樓讓出嘅安排，除咗為延續歷史，亦都希望此舉能夠幫助整個華埠。
I think in the end, if we're going to talk about Chinatown, you should show this. Everything is going to be all right because we have to deal with the cards we're dealt. And I think playing that into Chinatown is the Chinese Canadian Museum, knowing the challenges, is going to be the best leader to help bring everyone together.
This installation, I think Catherine Clement helped put together, is called a Sea of Faces.
利用華裔博物館作為渠道，為華埠未來帶嚟新氣象，亦都係華裔博物館協會主席 Grace Wong 黃麗珠嘅諗法。
I think the Chinese Canadian Museum is not just for Chinese Canadians. It affirms and shares that history and so on, but it is actually for everybody. It's that anybody that comes, and we welcome everyone to come, tourists, local, across Canada, from the US, everywhere, that they can learn and see this.
佢表示，自協會喺2020年成立之後，就開始為博物館籌劃永久選址。
We looked at probably in total 20 some sites, and so it really was quite a process. We wanted to be thorough, systematic. The committee held, frequent, regular meetings, and just looking at the various aspects of each site. So partly the cost, the size, the location, things like that. And then through that process into about roughly 6 months, and then it became kind of that there was a recommended preferred site, and that was the Wing Sing building.
呢一個結果令到佢哋感到好興奮。
It's the perfect home. I genuinely believe that, and I think our whole board believes that. It's a perfect home because it's the oldest historic structure in Chinatown. And so to be able to locate a Chinese Canadian museum in a building that has such historic value, again, the story is coming to life.
黃麗珠表示，位於永生號大樓嘅新博物館將會喺明年開幕，繼續傳承歷史。明年亦都適逢係家國實施排華法100週年。
I hope the full Chinese Canadian community can take pride in that. Next year when we open, again, that's another kind of, take the chance that it's the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Like, imagine that in 1923, Canada passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. So no Chinese should come. And then 100 years later, we can actually say the first permanent museum in Canada, Chinese Canadian Museum, will be in Vancouver, Chinatown. I think all of that coming together has very deep meaning and deep personal meaning, I think, to many people.
好啦，今集嘅節目時間呢又差唔多啦。咁如果觀眾對我哋嘅節目有啲乜嘢意見嘅話，係好歡迎大家以電郵嘅方式同我哋聯絡㗎。我哋嘅電郵地址係 mag26@fairchildtv.com。如果觀眾想重溫翻今集嘅節目，亦都可以上到去我哋嘅網站3w.fairchildtv.com， 點擊節目重溫一欄就可以睇得翻㗎啦。下星期同一時間再同大家見面，晚安。